Hello, we are the group number 8 and we are going to talk about the age of Milton. My name is Hilma Guillen and I'm going to talk about the Puritans, a little bit of the history and the origin of this group. The Puritans were a member of a religious movement of reformers known as Puritanism that was powered up by the King Henry VIII in the 16th century, but they become popular in the 17th century because they were a group of spirit and moral religion earnest, and they want to make the people more religious as they were. But because talking about the roots of the Puritanisms, they were a group of Christians that were separate of the Catholic Church of England because they think that they were pure persons and pure Christianism. Don't be the accord with the other Christians, and they decided to make a new movement, and this movement begins in 1560s, and that with the support of Henry VIII. The Puritanism begins to put pamphlets in the streets and giving conferences and giving classes of how the people have to become and how to comfort in the society. But some of the people were agreed with these new statements and become Puritanists as they were, but other people don't were in accord with that because the Catholic Church make them serious patterns to have to follow to be a Christian, and these persons starts to want more power and more power of the society, and they make alliance with the royalty as the Henry VIII, and then becomes a leader of the Puritanism that was Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell was the principal leader of the Puritan movement, and he put many of the lawyers of the Puritanism facts. But when he died in 1688, the Puritans that were left, they left the movement and support the royalty that was Charles II in that moment, and they modified the policy of the Puritanism, and they were disappeared, and the movement was disappeared because no one followed them yet. And that continue with this.
Okay, good afternoon, classmates. Good afternoon, Miss. Today I'm going to talk about the Puritans Literature writers. The writers are Anne Bradstreet, Jonathan Edwards, and William Spurgeon. Next, please. Okay, Anne Bradstreet. Okay, Anne Bradstreet was born in Dublin in 1612 in Northamptonshire, England. Okay, she married Simon Bradstreet and graduated of Cambridge University at the age of 16. 2 years later, Bradstreet, along with her husband and parents, immigrated to America with a winter Puritan roots, and the family lived in Litchfield, Massachusetts. There, Bradstreet and her husband raised 8 children, and she became one of the first folks to raise English verse in the American colonies. The next, please. Okay, Saturday Muse was the only collection of Bradstreet's poetry to appear during her lifetime. In 1644, the family moved to Andover, Massachusetts, where Bradstreet lived. Only her lived in 1672. In 1678. The first American edition of 10 news was published posthumously and spans several sponges complete with great wit and learning industry. Most Higley girls were a second originally sponge early completions was not published only the middle of the 9th century. Okay, Jonathan Edward. He was born on October 5 in 1733 in Windsor, Connecticut, US. He died in March 22, 1768. Princeton, New Jersey, great theologians and philosophers of British American Puritans, stimulator of the regular revivals known as the Great Awakening, and one of the foreigners of the gate of the present missionary expansion in the 11th century. The next please. Edward's father, Timothy, was pastor of the church. As his ministers connected to his mother, Esther was the daughter of Solomon Stowers, pastor of the church. As the northern to Massachusetts, Jonathan was the 5 children and only son among 11 children. He grew up in a atmosphere of spirit and piety, affections and learning after a religious schooling. At home, he entered Yale's College in New Haven, Connecticut, at the age of 13. The manuscript that survived from his student days exhibits Edward's remarkable powers of observation and analysis special displays. In one set, the fascination that the English scientific is of Newton's optical theory held for him of the writings, and his ambition to publish scientific and philosophical works in foundation of some materials in a taste natural philosophy. Okay, throughout his lifetime habituality, he studied with Penny and recording these thoughts in numerous hand-sent notebooks. One of these, his catalog of books, demonstrate the widest variety of his interests. William Spersky, of outstanding preachers, made great contribution to the Puritan movement. Despite the shortness of his life, he was born in Milton, Washington in 1668 and educated in Christ's College, Cambridge. In his early years, he demonstrated scholarly ability, but his personal life was wild and simple. He was much devoted to drunkenness. Around 1685, Spersky was chosen rector of the University of Cambridge and continued there only his died in 1632. His individual writings consist mainly of treatises of the Apostles' Creed and the Lord's Prayers and exposition of Galatians 1:5, Matthew 5:7, and Hebrews 12. Also, his wings is giving advice and comfort to troubles conscience side and said to have been so that the afflicts inspire far and near came to him and receive much comfort from his instructions.
Okay, hello guys. I'm going to talk about the political structure on the England of Wales. The Commonwealth was the political structure during the period from the 1649 to 1660, when England and Wales, later along with Ireland and Scotland, were governed as a republic after and the Second English Civil War. The trial and execution of Charles I. The republic existence was declared through an act declaring England to be a commonwealth, adopted by the Round Parliament on 19 May 1649. The power in the early Commonwealth was vested primarily in the Parliament and the Council of State. During the period, fighting continued, particularly in the Ireland and the Scotland. Between the parliamentary force and those opposite them to them, as part to what is now generally referred to the Third English Civil War. Continue, please. Okay, the Commonwealth period, it's very remembered for the military successes of the Thomas Fairfax, Oliver Cromwell, and the New Model Army. Besides resulting victories in the English Civil War and reformed the Navy under the command of the Robert Blake, defeated the Dutch in the First Anglo-Dutch War, which marked the first step towards English naval supremacy. In Ireland, the Commonwealth period is remembered for the Cromwell's brutal subjugation of the Irish, which continued the policies in the Tudor and the Stuart periods. Okay, in the social context, the entire period was dominated by the Civil War, which divided the people into factions, the one of the loyal to the king and the other opposite to him. English people had remained united and loyal to the sovereign. The crisis began when James I, who had regained the right to royalty from an act of parliament, gave too much importance to divine law and began to ignore the parliament that had created. The Puritans, who had become a powerful force in the social life of the time, announced the constitutional reform movement. Hostilities, which began in 1642, lasted until execution of Charles I in 1649. There was a little political stability during the 11 years interregnum that followed. These turbulent years saw the establishment of the Commonwealth, the rise of Oliver Cromwell.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Noemi Martinez, and I'm going to continue with literary style. So the old ideals were slowly crumbling, and yet the new ones had no power to be born. In fact, it was the period of the alternative rise of a brilliant epoch. Emotional fervor had wanted given way to play of intelligent intellect and fantasy. Literary fashions were changing rapidly and radically. In short, it was a time of transition, the literature style. The new literature being coined was called classical, but the word meant that it sought moderation, rhythm, and inspiration from the ancients. No poet of the later period, known as the New Classical, showed such a great and accurate understanding of the beauty of the ancients as Milton. In it, where there was a perfect fusion of the influence of the Renaissance and the Reformation. The period was too poor in the literature production, both in quantity and quality. In this respect, it contrasts sadly with the era that had just ended. The song of the Elizabeth era had set in twilight, and twilight has descended upon the literature essence. So we continue with the writers that are John Milton and John Dryden. Okay, John Milton was born in London on December 9 in 1608 to John and Sarah Milton. He had an older sister that was Annie, a younger brother that was Christopher, and several siblings who died before adulthood. As a child, John Milton attended a Paul's school, and during this lifetime learned Latin, Greek, Italian, Hebrew, French, and Spanish. He attended Christ's College, Cambridge, where he graduated in 1629 with a Bachelor of Arts degree, and in 1632 with a Master of Arts degree. In 1638, he undertook a long journey through French and Italy, where he met Galileo. But the political events of this country, where civil war had been declared, made him return after a year. In his homeland, he was involved the theological political questions, to which he responded with the polemical, in which he defended Puritanism to the extreme. And then I'm going to continue with John Dryden. Was an English poet, critic, and playwright, active in the second half of the 17th century. Over the span of nearly 40 years, he doubled in a wide range of genres to great success and acclaim. As a poet, Dryden is best known as a satirist and was England's first poet laureate in 1668. In addition to Cesarius, Dryden wrote elegies, wrote prologues, epicologies, odes, and panegyrics. His most famous poem is Absalom and Achitophel in 1681. Dryden was so influential Restoration England that the period was known to many of the age of Dryden. And continue with him, Dryden wrote plays through the 16th, 7th, and was the forefront of Restoration comedy. His best known plays were Married Alameda in 1673 and All for Love in 1688. However, his plays were never as successful as his poetry, and he eventually turned back to satires. In the satires that he wrote, Dryden often took aim at the whims, which earned him attention from Charles II in the 1680s. Dryden converted to Catholics and sent to work Christians and Anglican Church, which ultimately led him the position of poet laureate. So there are the reference of the information, and thank you.